at is that we don't present the facts to the community, and we allow issues and facts that are not germane to the issue to enter into the issue. So I think it's a fair, objective presentation of the facts to the community that's the responsibility of the leadership. And the will of the people is what rules in the end, but that doesn't mean you can't ask them the same question many, many times as our children do to us every day. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think John is absolutely right. It's the issues and the facts that are important here. And that's what's missing in much of these quotes that are given out, the issues and the facts. The true issues and the true facts, a lot of the times, are not let out to be heard. And I think that's one of the problems. I even have an issue with the local newspaper, where I you're over there, not allowing some input into that newspaper. It seems like it's a one-sided fight. There seems to be a lot of pro on one end and negative on the other in some aspects. But, you know, I wanted to get to one thing, and that was the financial question that Bob had asked. Actually, none of us really related to finances because it was a two-part question. I got a couple of minutes left. Financially, we were in a desperate situation this year. We were really in a Proposition 2.5 override situation, was negated by the Finance Committee on some, not manipulation, but maneuverability, so that we didn't have to go into a financial hardship and have to go into a prop override this year. But we were really in a Proposition 2.5 override situation this year. It didn't come about because we moved money from one account to another to offset our differences.
Thank you, Mr. Smith.
We won't be in that situation next year.
We will go to written questions and begin with Mr. Mounter. Do you support Proposition 2.5 overrides to fund the general government budget? If you do not support an override, what parts of town government would you reduce, and how would you resolve the shortfall? And sort of another question in the same vein is, what is your plan for dealing with the financial crisis facing this town next year?
Well, you know, just harping on the idea of dual tax rates, the idea of shifting taxes towards the commercial industrial sector to make the overrides a little more appealing to the general public, to really find out what it will take to turn a no vote into a yes vote. I mean, some people are always going to be voting no on certain issues, but there is a swing vote to be out there, and I think we need to find out what it will take to get yes votes on some of these things. Plus, I feel that at any one time we should only be looking at one override. This idea of several overrides at one time is just ridiculous. I mean, people just say, well, you're asking for too much. I'm not going to give you anything. We need to do one thing at a time, and we need to get out there and sell it, and really make it compelling, a compelling reason that this has to be overridden. You know, when we needed the high school renovated, it was a compelling reason we were going to lose accreditation. And when we did the library, it was when the Weeks building was going to be falling down, or it couldn't support the books. I mean, these are compelling reasons. We have to have compelling reasons for to override Proposition 2.5. And I don't think if you have 3 or 4 on at one time, these aren't it's not compelling. People can say, well, what do you folks really need? So I'm in favor of overriding Proposition 2.5 for the general government next year, but everything else is going to have to be excluded, and we're going to have to really sell that issue and actually tell people who's going to be laid off. If it doesn't pass, it's going to have to be really publicized and get to everybody, not just people who attend town meeting. So there's a lot of work to be done on this issue. Thank you.
Mr. Muldoon.
Well, as a general belief, I do not believe in continually having overrides as the answer to our budget problems. We do have possibly a problem coming next year because the expenses are far outgrown the revenue that is coming in. We certainly have to look long term in terms of bringing revenue into this town. That is growing the commercial tax base, attracting businesses to this town. This will grow our amount of revenue that comes into the town. In terms of next year, it could be a difficult situation. The Finance Committee does a terrific job, and they did a great job this year. We had a budget crunch, and they brought it in under the budget. They did a great job. They shouldn't be criticized for that. In the long term, we have to bring in more money. Next year, we will live within Proposition 2.5. That's what we have to deal with every year. And we will deal with the budget, and everyone will need to know going into next year that we will only be growing by 2.5. If they look at the budget beyond that amount of expectation, you have to realize that you may be requesting an override situation, which is always a difficult thing. If it is not passed, you will certainly live within the budget, and this is something you have to expect and understand. So we will certainly deal with stay within our budget as much as possible, and look long-term, have a long-term strategy for building more revenue for this town, so this kind of problem does not come again in the future. Thank you.
Mr. Smith. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Murphy.
Can I have a turn? As a general rule, I do not support overrides. They are sometimes necessary. I think by way of what exactly would I cut, I can't sit here tonight and say I would cut this or I would cut that. I can tell you that I am familiar with North Reading's budget, having been actively involved in town meeting and having followed along closely, and having served on the school building committee. I've also very actively followed the budget. But in Stoneham, where I lived prior to moving to North Reading, I served as both a member and chair of the Finance Committee. That was during a time of extreme fiscal difficulty. The community had a $900,000 free cash deficit, for those of you who know what that means, but that basically means they were in the hole by almost $1 million. It was a very difficult time. It was a very difficult period to bring in a balanced budget to the community, to minimize the impact to the services, to the residents of the community. I worked very closely with all the town boards and the leadership of the community to resolve those budget difficulties. We actually came up with, at that time, we came up with a temporary solution. And that temporary solution, we did a debt exclusion override for existing debt that had no more, that's remaining maturity was no more than 5 years. So what that meant was it was not a permanent override to fund the operating budget. It was a temporary override to fund the operating budget, so the town could take the time to sit down and develop a plan and develop a forecast. That's what we do at work every year, and that's what some of us do at home, but it's important to have a plan and a forecast before you can talk about a general operating override. Thank you.
Now, Mr. Smith.
In the area of the override questions, we do have to be more financially responsible and accountable, and we aren't. We have questioned on a number of occasions this year, we've questioned the administration as to why and why not they're spending money and allowing money to spend in certain areas. Specifically, the fire department, the police department with vehicles. We have more vehicles in some of these different departments than you can even begin to imagine. And the gasoline consumption, the maintenance costs, and all these different costs are just escalating and escalating. We have a $2,300,000 budget in one or both of these departments now, and just in the recent years they were only in the $1.5 million. They seem to be increasing on the hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. The school department budget goes up $1 million a year. But back that all up, and where we got ourselves in trouble is we take all our new growth revenues, which are the new revenues that we get from new creations of buildings, new creations of commercial buildings and things such as this, and that number is usually between $450,000 and $550,000 a year. What this administration has been doing is taking that new growth number and adding it to the base of the levy limit. Now, the levy limit is established by the 2.5 increase that you're allowed under the law. When you increase to 2.5, you can increase 2.5% of whatever you expended last year. Then you're allowed to add the new growth number to that figure. What we've been doing is adding that $500,000 and taxing to the maximum allowable for the last 10 years. If you multiply 10 years times $500,000, that's $5 million. So we've increased our operational budget by $5 million, and we're only collecting $500 or $1,000 a year. That's the reason we're in a budget crunch. That's one of the reasons. The other key area is in our negotiated contracts. We have been giving the barn away for a great many years. And as one of these gentlemen has just said, you can't spend more than you anticipate in getting in revenues. And we're collecting far less than 2.5%.
Thank you. Mr. Bagan.
Yes, Mr. Smith. We need, as everyone's mentioned, we need to live within the budget. We need to cut our expenses. I was on the Finance Committee 6 years ago for 3 years, and we had great economic times. No one's talking about the recession that's looming in front of us. Proposition 2.5 overrides have failed all around us. We need to cut back on our expenses. We have to go to our department heads. We have to work with them starting right away. I mean, we just found out that there's a shortcoming from the state for the school budget by almost $100,000. We've got to start tightening our budgets. We need to work with the heads of the departments. For example, DPW gets grants that they've been using for overtime on Saturdays. I would recommend that we take those grants and use them for Monday through Friday. That way we can cut back what the town has to kick in, and we can use the grant money. But one thing, we can't depend on these grants. We can't depend on state money. So we have to, as Mr. Murphy said, we have to live within our means. Thank you.
Mr. Mounter, would you like 1 minute rebuttal?
Well, I would just like to say that one gentleman I've been listening to for the last 2 or 3 years is Brad Jones Sr., who's been talking about this year that was coming when when our revenues wouldn't be meeting our expenditures. You know, they put it off this year. They moved $150,000 out of some insurance budget, pension budget rather. They missed the bullet this year, and I think it's going to be there. It's going to be there next year, maybe $500,000. I don't know. What would you say, Mr. Jones, for next year for the override in general government? I'm not running for this. Oh.
Good move.
Mr. Muldoon?
Well, I believe the school committee and the finance committee have been unfairly criticized. They do their job. They're like the rest of the boards in this town. They work without pay, and they work hard at what they're doing. The school committee has a constituency, and it is the children of North Reading, and they work hard to represent them the best they can. The finance committee does an excellent job. I've been to their meetings, and they really work hard at making sure that all the finances are covered and everything is done the best way possible, and they proved it this year by coming in under budget. I believe we should be thankful for what they do, and I think they will continue to do a good job next year, and they will work at doing what their purpose is, plus come in under budget and do the best job for North Reading. Thank you.
Mr. Murphy?
Just real quick, again, I think it's about leadership. It's about developing a plan. I think everybody foresaw the budget year that we had this year, and I think some people foresee a difficult budget year next year. It's about developing a plan now, today, and that's going to come from the leadership of this community so that this community can begin to move forward. This is a great place to live. That's why I came here. That's why I left Stoneham. When I left, we had $1 million in free cash, and I checked North Reading before I came. You had more than $1 million in free cash. The opposite has now occurred. You now have less free cash and Stoneham has more. This is a great place to live. I want to support the community. I want to serve the community, and I think I have the skills to provide the leadership so that we can move forward. Thank you.
Mr. Smith?
Right. The question was finances, and I don't think anybody's been critical of anybody. I think we're just bringing out points of factual information. But in rebuttal, I think the big key to the community as far as finances is going to be the decision that's made by the reuse committee, which starts Thursday night. That's a very important issue for this community. We probably won't see the revenues for probably 3 to 5 years, but when we do see them, they're going to be in the area of $2 million in tax revenue to the town, and that's going to be a big plus to reduce the burden on some of the homeowners that are struggling presently to pay the increased taxation. The other thing is, I fought very hard with the administration